Is that going to work? Yes.
Just waiting on Councillor Wilson. So it's just
Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority Skills Committee. Very late in the year. We don't normally meet at the very, very end of July, but political events have made it a case that we've had to report some things quite late. I would like to welcome Councillor Hemraj, although to this, her first meeting of the Skills Committee. It's very good to have you with us. Also, Councillor Carling has been elected as an MP, so he will no longer be on this committee, and Councillor Alice Gilderdale will be replacing him from Cambridge. She is unfortunately away this week, so is not able to join us for today's meeting. So I'm going to turn over to the Governance Manager to let us know of any other apologies.
Thank you, Chair. We've had, as you said, we've had apologies from Councillor Wakeford, and we've got Councillor Pitt substituting for him, and also from Charlotte Horrobin, the Business Board member.
I'd like to say welcome to Ben as well. It's very nice to have you with us. Second is the declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any items being considered today? I don't see any hands, but if anybody does think of any disclosable interests, they can be made at any point during the meeting. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes and action log. Is the committee happy to approve the minutes from the 17th of June as an accurate record and to note the action log? I don't see any hands raised, so I will assume that people are content to approve the minutes, and will sign them in a moment. Item 4 on the agenda is public questions. We have one public question that has been submitted for the meeting today. This has been circulated to members and published on the Combined Authority website. The question is from Anthony Carpen, who is unable to join us today, so I will ask the Governance Manager to read out the question.
Thank you. The question is, I note that despite my previous public questions about the importance of transport infrastructure to education and skills providers, Grant Thornton appears to have given minimal consideration to the issue in their report. In particular, they seem to have given minimal consideration to how we got to here with the creation of educational cold spots, government policies from the late 1980s onwards that led to the over-concentration of A-level places in one part of southern Cambridge, the impact that substantially improved transport infrastructure could have on the sustainability of new centres of further education in Cambridgeshire. Mindful that the new government is taking a different approach to the previous one, as already demonstrated by Northstowe, how will the CPCA be assessing what transport infrastructure is required to sustain any new facility building, providing further education options north of Cambridge?
Thank you. So I am going to make a response to this now, but I think there will also be a kind of fuller discussion on this topic when we come on to the cold spots work and the next steps. But this is helpful for the minutes. So the terms of reference for this first phase of work by Grant Thornton were quite closely focused and did not allow them to look at issues such as transport or government policy over 40 years. It is part of the recommendations for the report that the second phase of the Grant Thornton work will broaden their remit. However, I suspect that while transport issues may be included in some ways in that extra and next phase of the work, we will not want to stray too much into the field of transport policy, which sits with the Transport Committee, and that while we will want to look at changes to government policy, particularly government policy looking forward, it's quite unlikely that the next phase of work will include a review to the extent suggested in the question. So I hope that's an adequate response for now. And then we will move on to item 5, which is the Combined Authority Forward Plan. Are there any comments or questions on the forward plan, or can we take that as noted? I don't see any hands, so I'm going to assume that the forward plan is acceptable, and we will continue. And the next item on the agenda, which I think is the major thing that we are meeting to discuss today is the Further Education Cold Spots Feasibility Report, which I think is going to be introduced by Rob and Melissa. It's very nice to see you in person, having spent so many hours online. Thank you.
If we jump down, this is just a bit of background around started off the work. I'm not driving the slides. Sorry. Yeah, just a bit of background. So the CPCA secured some funding for post-16 education and training. I think originally that was for around 4,000 students. This work is off the back of that to look at the sort of feasibility of expanding provision within St Neots and East Cambs specifically. If we go on to the next slide, just again a bit of recap as to what we've done. So the work is really this sort of dual approach. We started off by taking a sort of look at a sort of strategic overview, looking at some of the key strategy documents in and around the region. And then we've got quantitative analysis, qualitative insights that we've collected, which have all sort of been triangulated, cross-referenced, cross-examinated, etc. We've looked at 30 odd data sets. That sort of covers labour demand, stock and flow, as well as supply, stock and flow, and looking at the sort of balance of the two. And we've drawn on the data from Cambridgeshire Insights as well. In terms of the qualitative insights, so we've done 20 or so semi-structured interviews with stakeholders. We've done 2 provider workshops. There's been a provider survey, focus group with year 9 and 10 students within St Neots and East Cambs, and 2 workshops with business. If we move on to the following slides. Sorry. So just in terms of key findings, and that there are a couple of documents that sit behind this, 100 odd page data analysis documents, pages of stakeholder findings. So this is a very, very succinct summary of some of the key things. If we move on, thank you. So across the region, there's sort of 5 key industries: education, information, communication, professional science, and technical. You can see them there. I shan't read them all off. Then when we look within East Cambs, employment, there is a relatively high concentration in primary utilities, construction and manufacturing. They've all grown very strongly in terms of GVA, and so has, although it's not its largest employers, information and communication, accommodation and food, and arts, entertainment and recreation. In Huntington, employment is relatively concentrated in primary utilities, so similar to East Cambs, and manufacturing, but also public admin and defence. Although it's not relatively concentrated, there is a large amount of employment within wholesale and retail, as well as health and social work, and strong growth in outputs in information and communication and admin and support. So they're sort of growing industries. Looking forward, we see a continuing growth in that sort of science, research, engineering and tech sector.
as well as caring, personal service occupations, business media and public service professions, and sort of new markets, new sort of roles around tech, data, and the transition to net zero. You just move on to the following slide. So then in terms of, also I think we've, in terms of what that means for jobs, and sorry, this looks slightly differently on my screen than it does on there. 9% increase per annum in the total number of jobs in the region. Significant growth in health and social work, professional services, support services, and accommodation and food. Continued decline expected in jobs in manufacturing as well as finance and insurance. And a lot of that growth that we're seeing, 3 and 5 of the new jobs, will be in professional occupations. So we're seeing that sort of occupational shift towards the higher skill end. Looking at replacement demand, which takes into account the movement of people sort of in and out of jobs, so not just the total sort of growth. Oh, sorry. All right. Oh, sorry. There you go. Speaking of tech and AI. So yeah, we'll see that replacement demand actually creates a lot of the need to fill jobs, more so than overall growth in employment. So it's about 6 times greater. So 19,700 jobs needing to be filled annually within the region. And a large proportion of those 12,700 are within business and other services, as well as public admin, both which noted above are sort of relative areas of growth and specialisms of Huntingdonshire. If we move on, please. I think in line with the sort of sectoral and occupational shifts that we're seeing, that sort of translates into this ongoing shift into demand for higher skills. So we're seeing a large growth in the undergrad and postgrad qualification requirements of jobs, and a decline in the sort of lower level qualifications, which could present a slight challenge for East Cams, where a high proportion of residents are employed in relatively low skilled roles. If we then turn on to the supply side, so if we look at population growth, we're anticipating population growth across the region as well as within East Cams and Hunts. So the numbers down there are the total population, working age population increases per annum anticipated. We also know that the region has very high employment rates, particularly in Huntingdonshire and East Cams, and within Hunts, a high youth employment rates alongside a relatively low participation rate in education, sort of suggestion that there's a preference for work over study. If we move on. There's also, not an insignificant number of people who are economically inactive across the region, and economically inactive who want a job. So in East Cams, it's around 2,700, and in Hunts, that's around 3,500 who want a job and aren't currently economically active. The consultations also brought forward the need for sort of soft skills and work readiness as well as confidence. So they might be quite critical in terms of helping this particular group, cohort, to access the employment opportunities. If we then turn to potential growth in further education, so if we look at the population growth, and if we apply a number of varying assumptions around historic participation rates, we can get an understanding of the potential sort of natural growth, if you like, in terms of FE places required in the two regions. In East Cams, we've got between 36 and 96 increase, and another 25 spaces in sixth forms. For Hunts, that's between 19 to 168 places per annum, and an additional 50 in sixth form places. We can move on. But like I said, participation in FE is relatively low in the region. It's the lowest amongst the devolved regions. So we also looked at what participation numbers might look like if each region, if St Neots and East Cambs had rates that were similar to each of their respective socioeconomic neighbours. So if they matched those higher rates, the increases would be up to 204 per annum in East Cambs and up to 318 per annum in Hunts. If we can move on, then just a few additional points, largely from the stakeholder engagements. There are a number of sort of overarching points. I think residents and businesses definitely had a sort of limited awareness of the opportunities in FE that exist. That's not necessarily unique to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Transport routes and timings were seen as a barrier, as well as an additional cost for providers who have to sometimes stump up that additional provision. But a couple of stakeholders sort of noted that the £1 bus fare could potentially help address some of that accessibility from a financial accessibility perspective. Capacity. Half of the providers are currently operating at sort of 80 plus capacity, which suggests that some of them are sort of reaching the limits of capacity that they have. Others aren't. It's not clear whether or not those are sort of specialist providers. So we're not able to distinguish where that capacity sits in full detail. Providers were concerned somewhat around what expanding provision might mean in terms of viability of their existing provisions, particularly with regards to potentially taking student numbers, but also in terms of recruiting staff in areas where there are already shortages. Number of challenges identified from the lack of investment in existing facilities. A number of providers noted the sort of the need to upgrade their facilities and create much more flexible spaces. But there are also a number of plans currently in the pipeline to expand existing provisions. So East Cambs Training Centre in Soham for lifelong learning, and also the recent LSIF funding for the bid led by CRC to deliver a number of green tech initiatives. So I'll hand over to Rob, who will talk through now some of the options for change. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And just to talk through a little bit of context before we dive into the options, if we could just go to the next slide, please. So just to sort of set the context, and the first big headline is these options aren't kind of mutually exclusive. What we're not going to sort of end up is saying, right, you've got to pick one. Actually, the discussion may revolve around, actually, should we look at a bit of a mix of some of these? And really the objective of our work was to kind of set the evidence base on which to start to make some of these decisions. So what we haven't done and we haven't reflected is any kind of level of sort of strategic ambition. There may be voices in this room that say, actually, you know what, we need to be more ambitious. We need to look at X or Y, and that all obviously need to feed into some of your conversation. We've looked at the kind of data and what people are telling us in terms of the current position. And then just two kind of overarching assumptions. Again, we don't touch on them. I think it links back to the question that was answered slightly earlier. We're assuming that whatever happens is supported and enabled by things like transport, raising awareness of opportunities and things like that. So again, we haven't focused in on those kind of overarching sort of needs. And we've also assumed that there is sort of consistent delivery and strategic delivery of skills across the region. So sort of some prerequisites that you might say, well, actually, we really need those to be in place. So we're assuming that is ongoing work that the combined authority is doing. Let me just talk you through the kind of 4 emerging options we're seeing in terms of what needs to be done. If we could just flick to the next slide, I'll talk you very quickly through the 4, and then we'll just touch in a bit more detail on each one before we flick to actually how you might implement it. So the 4 possible options are to scale up activity in St Neots and East Cambs to cover particular skills and or sectors that are in focus, and I'll unpack what some of those sectors might be. So that's sort of scaling up of existing activity. The second option is actually to really focus in on ensuring that within East Cambs and St Neots, there's a real focus on kind of middle and higher level skills provision. So an explicit focus on saying, actually, we see from the data, we see from the evidence that there's going to be a shift to higher level qualifications, to more skills being needed. So let's really focus in on that. Third option is around expansion of the T-level provision and actually exploring what that might look like. And then the fourth option, which has to be on the table in any sort of consideration, is actually, well, we're not going to do anything. We've seen the evidence, we've noted that, but actually we don't think there is anything that needs to be done in response. And that's a useful kind of option against which to test some of the conversations and some of the risks associated with kind of doing nothing. So let me just unpack those 4 options briefly for you. If we could just flick to the next slide. So the next couple of slides cover the scale up, and we think there are kind of 5 possibilities to look at. Again, I will hark back to that caveat about sort of these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive binary. It could be a combination. But in terms of scaling up activity, the first option would look at that entry level work ready skills with some kind of holistic wraparound. So it would look to provide those soft skills that a number of businesses and employers talk to us about needing, as well as working on issues around confidence and helping some of those out of work who are looking for work to move into work. In St Neots, any new offer would have to complement the existing provision that is there. And actually East Cambs, again, this could be really valuable, but it would need to consider it alongside the potential new training centre that Melissa highlighted in Soham. The second kind of potential option for this one is around expanding specialist provision, particularly in health, social care and education. You will remember from the kind of key finding slides, this is a big area where we're expecting to see significant growth in terms of demand. It's not just a local issue. You will see the kind of headlines nationally around that sort of skills, but actually is there an opportunity there to really focus in these 2 places in terms of building on those sectors. There's strong evidence of need. We're seeing if that's done in tandem with some of the existing provisions, so there's complementarity between other things that are happening in other parts of the combined authority, that there is definite opportunity there. Number 3 is around specialist provision, but more speaking to the sort of tech, digital, AI. I appreciate that is a broad spectrum of different activities, but there can be no doubt that the jobs that are going to exist in 10, 15 years' time are going to be much more tech, digital, AI enabled. It's going to be a much bigger part of just sort of core skills. So actually, is there opportunity there to start to say, well, actually, if we're going to be doing something new in St Neots and East Cambs, well, let's actually look at what we could do there. I think that the caveat on that is that we're not necessarily seeing anything different in those 2 places as regards to the need for those skills as we are across the rest of the areas. So that's just something to bear in mind. If we just flick onto the next slide, you'll see that there are 2 more. So the 4th one, again, variation on a theme, but looks much more to the sort of construction and green skills agenda. We know there's going to be significant amounts of building works, both kind of within the combined authority area and the immediate kind of surrounds, both in terms of housing and wider infrastructure. Alongside that, huge demand for kind of more green building types of methodologies and techniques, as well as the sort of retrofit work that would go on. So actually is, again, a bit like AI and digital, this is a sector of growth. Is there an opportunity as you look to new provision to start to speak into those? I think our sort of caveat on that one is obviously there is the ELSIF funding, particular focusing on green skills. So what might that look like in terms of not wanting to create competing demand, but also complementary? And then the final area is, I suppose it's a small but growing sector, is around arts and culture. So across both of the areas, we saw emerging kind of sort of strands of activity, both in terms of the sort of businesses starting up, but also in terms of skills and take up around this arts and culture sector. There's also limited provision in those areas across the wider combined authority region. So actually, is there again an opportunity, a slightly different way of looking at the problem, but to say actually, if we're going to be putting in new provision, there's a lack of provision elsewhere. Is this an opportunity? And certainly, we could see both from the data and from the consultations that both St Neots and Cambridge, that there were some definite opportunities and threads that could be pulled there. So that's option one, scale up activity around particular sectors. If we just flick to the next slide, we'll just look at option two, and that is around expanding around this mid-level, high level. And the kind of argument here is about saying, well, actually, we want to retain people in the local area. We want to support residents into the jobs that we know are going to be created, that are going to need those higher level skills. There's a sort of tactical and an operational side to this one, but it's about saying, actually, we see this growth. We know Cambridge and Peterborough, there's a sort of international significance to much of what's going on in here. So actually, how do we better enable our residents to transition and take advantage of those opportunities? And I think there, again, there's potentially really strong evidence of needs in St Neots and East Cambridge around this, particularly in subjects where, again, there is lower provision across the wider region. So business admin and law, those are kind of national statistics definitions, but you probably get a sense of the sorts of skills that sit in there. Engineering, the kind of next wave of manufacturing, the sort of future manufacturing sort of stuff. Is there a real opportunity to say, actually, let's really equip residents in those places to better able to move into those jobs? Option three, and then the next slide, it sort of builds on that theme. It's about kind of this evolving industrial base that we talked about, and it's about saying, well, actually, what are the opportunities with T levels? I think it's fair to say that there are a number of potential issues, if I can put that in inverted commas, around kind of T level integration. It's not necessarily proven in the same way that some of these other courses are. So actually, if that was an area, there would need to be some wider thought around that integration with the wider education system, both in terms of how people perceive it, but also actually the opportunities that creates and leads to. And then if we just go to the final slide on this one, this has to be a default option. And it'd be remiss of me not to say that, yeah, one of the decisions could be, well, actually, no, we've looked at the evidence and we've decided that do nothing is the right option. At the very least, that's what we're going to compare any future options in terms of costs and benefits. So that's the sort of question about what needs to be done. There are then a range of options for how you do it. So if we could just flick to the next slide, it's ended up being 4 and 4. That's not sort of intentional, but it does kind of provide a bit of symmetry. So there are 4 broad options. Again, let me just quickly work through them, and then I'll talk you through in a bit more detail. So one option in terms of once you've decided what you need to do, how you do it, is, well, we could build new flagship buildings to enable that provision. That's kind of option one in this. The second one is around multiple smaller provision. So you could actually say, well, actually, let's not build the kind of one big flagship, but look at how we create smaller provision, perhaps tied to particular types of education or particular styles of delivery. Option 3 would be to say, well, actually, let's not create new, but let's expand existing facilities in those places. Let's really focus in on that. And then option 4, again, we'll unpack this in a bit more detail, but actually is to say, well, let's not look at putting new facilities into those places, but let's look at working with our existing FE provision across the whole combined authority area and look at how that could start to address the issues. Again, I'll just whiz through those in a little bit more detail. If we just flick to the next, sorry, just go back a couple of slides, sorry. Yeah, they're perfect. So creating a new flagship building that would be capable of offering multiple subjects at a range of different skill levels. Cutting to the chase, the evidence doesn't suggest that there's going to be the learner numbers to justify the financial viability of something like that, at least in the near term. Melissa took you through the sorts of numbers we'd be looking at, and that compared to the sorts of costs mean that a kind of big new flagship building in either of these places is unlikely to be financially viable from our analysis. If we just go to the next slide. In terms of smaller provision, actually this is where the viability based on those numbers, particularly alongside work around increasing participation, transport improvements, and you're getting some of those higher level numbers, actually, those upper estimates would suggest that actually a range of smaller provision focused on particular subject areas, particular kind of needs, could actually be really viable. And particularly you get a sort of another win, and if you can kind of create sort of some proximity between those different sites, so you're starting to share some overheads, some assets, some of the fixed costs. So actually you're creating kind of a version locally in St Neots and East Cambs that enables these subjects to be delivered in a way that doesn't just generate the same kind of sort of fixed overhead on each one. If we just flick to the next slide, this is kind of similar-ish, but it's less about building new and it's much more around the expansion of existing facilities. So it'd be about saying, are there places, are there things within East Cambs, within St Neots that we could use to start to deliver? So you decide what you want to deliver and then you start to explore where would be best to deliver those. Those would obviously have some similar economies of scale and benefits. Not having to incur big upfront significant capital costs would help with the financial viability of those as well. And then if we just flick onto the final option, in terms of existing FE providers around Cambridge and Peterborough, you won't be surprised to know that lots of the providers were very keen on this view, given some of the challenges they've had. We are alert to that. We are mindful of that's the view of the providers, but actually, when you start to look at some of the evidence in terms of the investment that they've not had over a number of years, some of the challenges they're facing in terms of saying, well, actually, how do we make our provision more fit for purpose? How do we kind of make it more suitable in terms of delivering further education? Coupled with some of the existing investments that have already been made, so CRC's Huntingdon campus, actually, is there an opportunity to work with those providers in a more intentional way, supporting that with investment so that actually you can start to not only provide options for St Neots and East Cambs, but actually looking across the area as a whole. I'm conscious we have kind of bombarded you not only with huge amounts of paper in the papers before this meeting, but there was a lot of stuff we've just rattled through there. So if I can just sort of touch on the final slide, then I will pause, Chair, and hand it back over, because I'm sure there will be questions and a desire for discussion. But if we can just flick to the final slide, and this covers really the key points that are in the covering note from the Combined Authority. In terms of the kind of recommendations and proposals. First one is to note the feasibility report. The second is to use this time now to kind of discuss the proposals that are on the right hand side of this slide, as well as other points in the slide. Number 3, to endorse the kind of development of a clear action and implementation plan, and then to kind of receive regular progress updates, the first one being in October. And the two proposals on the table at this stage are that we would utilise some of the ring fence funding to support the expansion of existing facilities in St Neots and East Cambs. So we would do something in those places. It would be around that expansion of existing. And then secondly, we would use some of the remaining monies as capital funding for existing FE providers across the combined authority region to try and strengthen and support their development. They're the kind of proposals on the table. Chair, I'll hand back to you for the rest of this session, but we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob and Melissa, for all the work that you've done on this, and indeed all the meetings that you've had with me and a number of other councillors, particularly James and Sam, who have spent a lot of time talking this through with you. Good. There is a lot of information in there. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion, and it probably needs to be. Who would like to go first? James.
Switching this on is probably the most difficult thing. Can you hear me? We've looked at your reports in East Cambs, and we welcome what you've done. I think you've done a very good job. You've given us the information to look at what we think we ought to be doing, and we've had several meetings around your report, and some definite ideas about what we would like to do in East Cambs. We have two sites, one in Soham, which is a very small site, but has room for development. And we have the Bishop Laney College in the centre of Ely, which geographically has a large piece of land with the site and is already being developed to allow us to increase the number of pupils we have there and to grow our sixth form college from 250 adults, children, to a much larger number. We've also looked at the numbers that you have projected in the various areas where training would be possible to do. And we almost have all the structure as far as the buildings are concerned within Bishop Laney College to accommodate most of what we would need going forward. So it looks very positive. We are already doing some work in the health service care and of course education. We have on our doorstep in East Cambs companies involved in the gaming industry. And together we believe that we could create training to enable youngsters to go from the college directly into the gaming industry and work alongside them. And we also have up in East Cambs part of the broadcasting industry. And again, we would propose that we would work alongside those to provide good youngsters to go into the broadcasting industry. We're already involved in T-levels. We believe the construction and the green industry could quite easily be accommodated within what we've already got with a little bit more. And as far as Soham is concerned, we are already trying to get people further educated to get them back into work. And we are quite strong there in arts and culture. But we have there, I don't know whether you've seen that site, we have there a certain amount of area where we could grow the site for other applications. And we are also working with CRC and West Suffolk in promoting further learning for young people. So we see what you've done as being very helpful to us and given us direction for the future. Thank you.
It's actually just a straight question to Councillor Lay. There's a lot of information there. Have you spoken to the Combined Authority about it? I think that's the reason. Sorry, the way you were talking gives me great concern because you're here to speak on behalf of the combined authority, not just East Cambridgeshire. And sorry, through the.
Okay. The next.
Uh-huh. Okay, through Chair.
Okay, can I just first of all, can we just check about whose microphones are on and whose are off? There's one at the far end. Could we turn that one off? I don't think it's causing a big problem, but I think it might do. James, I'm not quite sure that all of your answer will have ended up on the live stream, because I don't think your microphone was on. Just to come back to the actual point of the discussion, rather than just thinking about microphones.
Yeah.
I take your point, Nick. I think James has been involved in quite a lot of discussions with Melissa and Rob over the last 6 weeks or so on this. We're beginning to start talking about the next phases. I mean, I think quite a lot of what you were just saying was the next phases. So those will clearly need to be discussed with the combined authority, and I think we're kind of slightly jumping ahead of where the recommendations are. So probably for this meeting, let's stick with the recommendations and views on the recommendations that we've got, rather than what they will actually lead to, because that work will need to be done by Grant Thornton in the next phase of their work, but not just with Grant Thornton, also with Andrea and Richard and others. I think it's really helpful feedback, and it's really good to hear that the East Camps have been discussing it, but the next phases of the work will need to be kind of done through the offices here. Nick.
James, the reason I say this, because I want to put this in sort of some historical context, which I might actually come to you, Chair, to try and explain. I very much remember this landing pretty much within the first year that I was mayor. The idea that we would find, and I looked again at the figures, there's a lot of capital and there's a lot of revenue, which is still essentially unspent. But the genesis of it seemed to be, look, we can look at this. And it goes back to a point, and I talk about this openly, is that as coming in as mayor, there was a point which you will remember, in the first budget setting process we had in the first year, it was literally, we said, well, what does everybody want to do? There was an element of that, in trying to understand and get cooperation between the county council, between the district councils, as to kind of how we would spend gain share. And when this was put forward, I remember at the time, I don't know the real drive. Was it a drive from Huntingdonshire and East Cambridgeshire? Was it a drive from our officers at the time? Was it a drive from you, Chair? So it was trying to kind of say that there is an inequality there, which we should be looking at. What I want to come back to is to you and say, Grant Thornton, thank you. I mean, it's probably taken a lot longer than we would have wanted it to get to this conclusion. But what I can see here is that in our budget at the Combined Authority, we have put aside almost £5 million of capital and obviously revenue, which has been spent well with you. I want to acknowledge that. To come to the conclusion, we probably don't need, and this is for discussion, to build another building somewhere. So it's almost like a case of, well, if, we need to look at the areas, particularly that are underserved in terms of this offer, in terms of adult education, further education. But I really like the idea that we're beginning to, in your report, think about other things. And then this goes back to let's avoid the situation we become too localized about what is St. Neots going to get. And I speak, I live near St. Neots, so I'm very much a fan of the area. I absolutely see what East Cambridgeshire wants. But rather than sort of maybe going back to a thing, what are we going to get for these two areas? Look at how we can build up. This is the thing. When you speak, are we speaking here for the whole of the Combined Authority? Because the idea that you put on the table there about the idea of an arts and culture site, something that is not well provided for across the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, it may well be that something really different, acknowledging that there's a change in the way that we work. Look at all the digital hubs we've got. That's when we talk about media, that's digital culture. We could be thinking about that sort of thing for the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but put it in Ely, put it in St. Neots, rather than sort of, we need to create another college. So that was really why I came back, James, because it was so clear that plans had been made. I think, hold on, we're here to discuss it. We want strategy. And I defer to you, Chair, because you are the lead for skills here. But it was just, I really liked the report. I just thought, sorry, it's taken such a long time and we haven't moved on. But maybe it's the worst thing we could have done was build 2 new colleges and then nobody came. You know, what we could do is really think again about repurposing buildings, maybe on sites that you described, or old derelict buildings in market towns that are not being used. Create a campus in the centre of Ely, create a campus in the middle of St. Neots. Anyway, just a few thoughts, but thank you for letting me ramble.
Very careful not to set more hairs running there.
Yeah, no.
Ben and then Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So my son is 15, he'll be doing his GCSEs next year. So this is a very live subject for our household. And it's been interesting going around some of the sixth form colleges, looking at the options. And the thing that strikes me, so there's some really good options that we're choosing between, but really it's about the thing that will clinch it is what are the opportunities that inspire my son? So he's not thinking about a career yet. Well, he's got some thoughts and he may follow them or he may not. But he'll visit a place and he'll think, oh, I can imagine myself being here and enjoying it. And I think, so the report that we've got in front of us is really helpful. It sets out a lot of complex overlapping issues. And you've talked about sort of demand and supply and transport and marketing and sort of future, like political leadership in terms of where we want to be. And all these things have to sort of be broken down and put together in some sort of meaningful way, which is really tough. But I do think, kind of touching a little bit on what Nick is describing, is actually how can we do things that are going to, so I'll go back a little bit again. So looking at options, we didn't talk about FE in our household, and actually I don't think it was really mentioned to my son when he was at school as a aspirational thing, and it should be. There's lots of really exciting jobs that exist within further education rather than A levels and, you know, degree level subjects that people should be aspiring to do. So I think that bit of political leadership that you've acknowledged isn't on the table at the moment is really key to unlocking something that's going to have a long-term sustainability, because we can look at numbers and say, well, there's a bit of space there, so we can, you know, accommodate that space. But if we can create something that actually makes young people excited, I think that's the way to build that sustainability into what we can deliver. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I think the things you described there sound really exciting to me.
Thank you. Katie.
Sorry, press it harder. Thank you. And yeah, thank you very much, GT team. I was very privileged to be part of the consultation process. And I don't envy you the scale of the job and the amount of emotion that sits behind it. As a St. Neots resident and obviously representing the sort of business community and in and around St. Neots, I think my one concern is that there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between kind of the stats and the forecasts and the kind of planning that is pulled out in this report versus what businesses are planning and what you hear in terms of where they're looking to scale and the sectors that are looking to scale. So that kind of was my first bit of feedback. So I know we had a bit of an issue in terms of the report not contain very much direct business engagement. So I know St. Neots Initiative had to kind of haul in kind of, I think 30 odd businesses at very short notice to try and add some voice. The voices around that table were talking about, and I get the point about we do need to keep an eye on the strategy, but we have a really now issue in terms of our local employers, myself included, really struggling to get technical education, good technical education from our local providers. Our next nearest, I think we all kind of concluded in that room in St. Neots, was that our kind of best local provider is actually Bedford College. So they're having to go out of patch, and they're a great provider. They'll put on things like minibuses to get to Shuttleworth, etc. So they make it work. But again, that's a long journey for those young people. And there was someone in the room who lives in a village kind of near St. Neots. They're then having to travel from the village to get into St. Neots, to get to the minibus, to go out of county to the next nearest provision. So I think my other concern is where we're talking about building on what's already there isn't really a lot in St. Neots. There are like tentacles that we can attach to in terms of those existing providers. But my concern is possibly, unlike East Cams, there isn't a lot already there in St. Neots. And I think the solution has to be in St. Neots, not just in Huntingdon, because again, you're just diluting kind of what that need is there. So I think that's kind of a a jumble of comments rather than questions.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Eileen.
Thank you. When I was looking through the report, I don't want to divert the whole thing, but I think I would like to know that there's something going on in the background, looking at the reasons for the disparity between the different areas. And for example, in the report, it's coming up as page 86 here, where in the socio-economic overview of East Cambridgeshire, where children at the expected level for maths by the end of the early years was 80.5%, and communication and language by the end of early years was 80.9%. But then when we get to GCSE, it's dropped down to 77.3%. And for an age 16 to 64 with level 3 qualification, 62.4%. And I just wonder whether there's any work going on anywhere to actually evaluate what is happening in these places. That means that we've got to the point where we're having to upskill people when they're adults, rather than the ambition and aspiration being there when people are actually going through the formal education.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know whether anyone wants to comment on the points that Eileen has raised. I think they might be sort of slightly outside the remit of this paper, but they are certainly important. To Andrea on that one, but I think we do need. I mean, I'm slightly nervous about broadening out the conversation too far, because otherwise we can get into an extremely general debate about general education. Andrea, I'm sure whether I've welcomed you, Andrea. I think this is your first meeting.
It is. Hello, everybody.
And I haven't yet welcomed Andrea, who is our new lead for skills, and we are very lucky to have her.
Thank you. Thank you. So just briefly, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, anything like this takes a whole systems leadership approach in terms of, with skills, employment, education. You have to look at it cradle to grave in terms of when you need certain things at different points. And I think just to say your point's very valid. And I think moving forward in all of the work we do around skills and employment, we will always need to look at that socioeconomic information and work closely with colleagues at Cambridgeshire County Council and other systems to make sure that we're looking at the early years and upwards and making sure we've got the right provision in place to support them.
Yep. And on a positive, I mean, hopefully you will be aware of the state of the region work that is at the heart of everything that the combined authority is moving forward with. A lot of the combined authority, I'm often told, was put together with a view to kind of answer the information that was put in front of it in terms of the Cambridge and Peterborough Independent Economic Review before combined authority came into being. Well, since that was put into the public domain, and it's a great document because it covers a lot of what you've just articulated, things have changed. You've had Brexit, you've had a COVID pandemic, you've had huge challenges around cost of living, and, so the need for that state of the region work, which is being done in-house right now with a view that it will always be regularly reviewed in conjunction with constituent members and constituent authorities, constantly reviewing a lot more than what the combined authority was put together in terms of how many jobs are there, how many houses are being built, and what's the GVA. So I'd say your concerns have actually been articulated and are being looked into. It's our job now to get that first report out there into the public domain sooner rather than later, and then as a kind of call to arms, say, what are we going to do about it, both at board level, but at constituent authority level? So it's been done in recognition of the officers.
Thank you, Ben, and then I'm going to make some comments.
Thank you. Can I ask, so Rob and Melissa, in terms, so picking up on the point Katie made, so the recommendation to expand existing facilities in St Neots and East Cambs, and apologies, I'm a sub on this committee, so it may well be covered in the reports that we've got in front of us, but do you have specific sites and or organisations in mind, or do you have a process for identifying those, or what does that look like in practice from today onwards? And then I'll ask a separate sort of broadly related question. So the other recommendation to invest in existing FE providers, do you have, what expectation do you have that will actually increase uptake from the identified cold spots, or are we just going to create, will it solve the problem, I suppose is the question I'm asking. Thank you.
So in terms of the first part of your question, I mean, the answer to both is kind of similar-ish, but taking the first part, yes, we do have some initial ideas based on the kind of detailed consultation exercise that we've done, the conversations we've had, both with kind of key stakeholders, businesses, but actually the kind of next phase of the work, and this work was always intended to be 2 phases, would be to say, well, actually, let's really turn that into kind of proper sort of options and start to explore much more detail, so that rather than it being kind of high level, we're actually saying, it's likely to cost X, it's going to be here, those sorts of things. So that is very much kind of the next phase. Andrea and I had a conversation on Friday, and I think actually one of the benefits of the way this has been set up is we can move very quickly, assuming that don't want to preempt things, but if that is the direction to move into that phase, because we are conscious, and it has been a sort of repeated refrain, that this work has taken quite a long time to sort of get to sort of the starting gun and kind of where we are now. So I think we can move forward at pace. And I think that's then also true for the kind of wider provision. And I think what was interesting in the conversations we had with providers is they were really, really keen to be part of the solution. Yes, the cynic will say, well, of course they are, because they might see some funding, but actually there was a genuine desire to want to kind of work with the combined authority to look at what that solution looks like. So I think some of that, and I think this speaks partly to Nick's point earlier, is actually some of that conversation has to be around, well, how do you help us fix some of these issues and challenges, not just we're going to give you money so you can reconfigure your classrooms. I'm being slightly flippant, but it's that debate and it's that conversation, and we know that kind of funding facilitates those sorts of conversations. So the fact that you've got that kind of carrot, I think you now need to work out, well, how do you then work together for the benefit of the whole combined authority area? But of course, having those conversations that might explicitly say, well, how does this benefit a resident in East Cambridgeshire? What are you actually going to do to help with that? So I think very much that is also part of the next phase of work. And it's not just kind of us, but I think that is us working as a team with the officers in the combined authority to really hone that side in terms of the provider relationships.
Thank you. Then my last thank you. I really appreciate it. So just so I understand clearly, so is there a proposal within those to do a sort of satellite building from some of the existing providers within the cold spots, or is it more about investing in those existing providers where they are?
So I think the way the sort of next phase would work is very much once we've got a clear idea of what we should do, we explore how we should do it. So when we're thinking about, do we do it with the sort of existing providers based more widely around through satellites or outside of the region or outside of the areas, or do we do it with providers currently in the area, will very much depend, I think, on what we choose to do. So, but I think they'd all probably come back onto the table to be assessed against as potential options, really.
Thank you. So I think there is a sense in this meeting that everybody is trying to kind of jump to the next stage before we've done the next stage of work, and I think we need to be really careful about that. So I've got a couple of things I want to say. The first of all is thank you very much for all the work that's been done on it. I think it would have been ideal if we'd started all this 6 months before we did, but it's a really important piece of work that has been done, and it will help us make the next steps well. It is a very complicated topic. There are lots of different providers doing different things. Some of those providers have very loud voices and have engaged energetically in the process. Other providers are much smaller. Some of them probably haven't engaged very much with the process at all. And as we move to the next stages, it's, I think, extremely important that we don't make assumptions about where the capital spending might go, who might get first dibs on that capital spending. So the next phase of work is going to be really important in that. And I think it is important that we don't make any assumptions in this meeting, and that it's kind of clear to providers that assumptions are not being made by what's here as well. I mean, I think that it would be quite easy to read into this, oh, we're going to be investing in, for example, the site in Huntingdon. That's not necessarily the ideal way to provide for young people in St Neots, and it's I'm sure the people in the site in Huntingdon would love that to happen. We are not making that decision today. It needs to come back through the process, and we all need to look at what the outcomes are from engagement, not only with the providers that have been engaged with already, but by potential other ones, and particularly, I mean, I think the in the options section, option 2, new multiple smaller provision, actually we haven't really talked about that very much. I think it's more difficult for people to get their heads around what that might look like, but it's a really important second option. And in terms of provide the things that Katie was talking about to do with real skills shortages, and what employers need, that might actually be a better option than some of the other ones. So there is a lot more work to do on this, and that work is very important. And it's crucial to say that I don't think any of that, no decisions have been made. We're just moving to the next phase of the work, except that probably this does rule out, let's build a new FE college in the middle of St Neots, because the numbers just aren't there, and it is important to kind of rule some of those things out. There's some of the other things that came up during the conversations about this work that we haven't really touched on very much today, and one of those is the fact that actually the numbers of the growth numbers in the documentation look surprisingly small, given the amount of building that there is in both East Cambridgeshire and St Neots. And quite a lot of that is because a lot of the people in those places leave to do FE provision in other places or don't move on to it. And there's a certain amount of work that I think needs to be done looking at capacity across the wider area, and whether that's good for our learners, if that makes sense, whether it's the right thing for so many of them to leave, or whether actually we might get more people with higher skills if there was more provision in the place. So there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of work which with things that this document has flagged up that I think we will cover in the next phases of work. I'm just trying to think whether there was anything else I wanted to say. I haven't heard anybody sort of speaking against the recommendations so far. I mean, I think there's been a lot of conversation about what happens next. I think it's quite possible that before this comes back to the next skills committee meeting, we might want to have a sort of informal briefing on where you're getting to and what the next phases are, so that all of us who are extremely interested in this and always have been are very aware about what the kind of process is. So I suspect that our next steps will be an informal briefing maybe, and then coming back to committee with some other recommendations. But so far, I think people seem happy to take the recommendations and the suggestions that are on the paper. Ben?
Agree with all of that summary. My one question is just on the process, really. So there's a proposal in 2.4 of so basically the delivery options 3 and 4 are being sort of favoured. And I guess from the conversation today, I think I agree that I think that the flagship provision is probably being dropped at this stage, but the multiple smaller provision seems to be somewhere in between those two. And actually, I'd really be really keen to keep that on the table. I think the question of who delivers it and where it's delivered are kind of, obviously they're massively linked, but they're two separate questions that need to be answered. And I think that option 2 provides an interesting way of unpacking that I think should be kept up as a realistic way that we should keep developing.
Thank you. I mean, my understanding is that the recommendations are definitely keeping option 2 in the mix in terms of what happens next. We are sort of ruling out option 1. I'm slightly hoping we're ruling out the do nothing option as well. So which effectively leaves us with the next phase of work, looking at how we might encourage new multiple smaller provision, probably quite focused on specific areas, and some of that, I mean, health and care is obviously one of the ones that comes out with strong support. We've heard Nick's preference for, and actually also from James about the culture piece, which I think is also important. That's part of the next phase, and also expanding existing facilities. And I think it is important to say that in existing facilities, there are a very significant number of providers who have existing facilities within these areas. So it's not making any assumptions about where that capital investment goes or who might get it, because there are several providers who that could apply to. Good. I think we'll now move to the recommendations. I haven't again heard anyone speak against them. So if everyone is in favour, actually, I'm going to propose this. Who would like to second it? James, yes, excellent. We'll have James as the seconder for the recommendations, and all those in favour, if you could indicate now, please, that would be very helpful. I think that's unanimous. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful. And thank you very much, Melissa and Rob, for the work so far. And we will look forward to updates in a month or 2. Thank you. Right. We will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Good Work Charter, which is being introduced by Laura. Thank you, Laura.
Try this one. Thank you, Chair. And I was going to say good morning, but it's ticked over. So good afternoon, members. So Good Work Charter. I've got a presentation. I'm just going to introduce why we're revisiting it today. Initially, this was a piece of work that was started by Claire Paul, and I think she last spoke to the committee probably springtime. And this was an agenda item to deliver you an update for consideration and for some input. So you have had a paper, and I'm not going to go through the paper line by line, but I am just going to pull out some of the key points that sat within this. So there's numerous reviews into good working practices and the purpose and benefits of good working practice. And one of those being the Taylor Review of Modern Working Practices was outlined in the paper. And there's 3 categories, of which 53 recommendations sit within, and they sit around fair and decent work, clarity for employers and workers around employment status, employment rights and responsibilities, and fairer enforcement of employment law. And within that sit the 53 recommendations, of which I don't think any of us would disagree with, that they reflect good work. There is nothing in there where you sort of go, why would I want to do that? They're sensible, logical, sort of evidence-based. The next one, please. Along from that, there is also the Institute for the Future of Work, that have a Good Work Charter, and within that they outline areas of what makes up good work. And again, nothing in there that I think anybody would argue with. It sits around access to good work, fair pay, fair conditions, equality, dignity, autonomy, wellbeing, support, etc. Within the report that was submitted, there was quite a bit of detail that sat within that space. But again, this is sort of your evidence base that moves into why we want to be working around a Good Work Charter. So what are other areas doing?
there's a lot that's being rolled out or has been rolled out across the MCA network and the GLA. And why have they done it? Well, good jobs. I suppose there is a decline, if you like, in good jobs, and where we're seeing that, it's within sectors and occupations that are predominantly low wage. This therefore has an impact on those that are within those roles, which typically are those of a lower socioeconomic background, or young people straight out of school that are working within that space. So we're looking at further disadvantaging the disadvantaged if we're not doing anything that sits around the promotion of good work. Across the other areas, we've seen a number of them roll out and a number that's going to be rolled out. But actually, I would say one of those sticks out as a real area of best practice from some of the conversations we've had, Colin, which is Greater Manchester and their Good Employment Charter. So they're an area that are really starting to measure the impact, and I think they've released a report that sits around what good work has meant to them. And it sits around, they've got their sort of core pillars, if you like, which sit around secure work, flexible work, pay, engagement, recruitment, people management, HR, health and wellbeing, and resources for employers. Greater Manchester have this as an initiative that is from the top down. It is something that sits across all of their strategies, is at some level involved within their policies, and it runs right through their procurement policies and right through the procurement policies of constituent members. So whilst in conversations we'd had with them, they were saying that they'd got, I think it was at the time, about 124 employers signed up to it. And you sort of think of all the businesses that sit in Greater Manchester, that number seems, a relatively modest amount. But actually the benefit and the impact they're seeing through the wider supply chain of those people that they're working with and the suppliers into the Greater Manchester economy is vast. This means they're able to measure return on investment. It means they are able to really demonstrate the impact and value of good work. I think it's worth noting that they've had significant investment into the team that is delivering the Good Work Charter. And, with investment comes the ability to be able to sort of work at scale. Can I have the next one, please? So in terms of why this is resonates with our region particularly, it sits around our mayoral ambitions. This helps create that fairer, healthier and sub-region for all. And it aligns with the combined authorities' economic growth strategy to enable inclusive growth across our sub-regions. In the later item I'm going to present around universal support, we've got a piece of work that's landed in the area. It's being led by the Integrated Care Board. It's called Workwell, and Workwell is around supporting those that are closer to the labour market or at risk of falling out of the labour market. And it's referenced through the Workwell bid and delivery about how a charter could facilitate and support that. And there is the interrelationship to universal support or whatever that programme may look like. It sits within the Action for Poverty and Employment 2023, which is part of the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board. And it also sits in the NHS Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Joint Forward Plan. So there's a lot of places that we see good work, almost the formalisation of good work coming to life in this area. And then from an employer's perspective, there's been a number of engagement activities that have taken place. And we know we're operating in a really, really tight labour market at the moment. It's difficult to find resource, it's difficult to find capability. And within this, it gives us that place to offer transformational work experiences and better health comes for employees, where people are feeling, the potential of burnout, where they are feeling there is more that is being asked of them. This almost can act as a tool to support employers in how they can support employees, about where they can be going for additional support. So I think there is a real sort of sense of how we can support employers. And we'd support through or what we're suggesting is it's support through a practical approach. So there are a number of different initiatives that operate in this space. We have some formalised accreditations, charters, marks, something like Investors in People. There are wider marks that I think sit in this space. And I don't think what we want to do is make something that is competing, that is difficult to access. I think we need to make something that employers in the region can see a value and a benefit to, that isn't creating additional work for them. So I think what we're looking at is something that is a celebration of good practice. I think it's something that gives a framework of what good work might look like. So if you were to, I don't know, envisage something that sat around the core themes we've seen running through other charters, it might be that we're offering resources and support to achieve that. So we're taking employers on a journey of continuous improvement and a journey of identifying best practice and building upon that. And I almost see it in that space of offering some sort of HR type support to the SME market. So, if we consider a lot of SMEs that wear numerous hats at multiple times, what can we do that supports them in that space that goes on to promote good work? The next piece, Callum. So in terms of consultations so far, there's been a number of activities we've done to share ideas, to get input into this. And that has included the list you can see up there. So it ranges from the chief execs of constituent councils, skills committee back in spring. We've got economic development officers. We've engaged with the chamber. We're working closely with public health on this. We've run a couple of events with public health that have brought employers together to understand what is important. And there are further consultations planned. So what we're looking at doing is getting input from key stakeholders in this space as to how the charter is further developed prior to its launch. Next one, please, Callum. I'm not going to go through the feedback to date, but we've got a lot of it's been covered in this presentation, but we have taken a number of key points that's been fed back to us, and it's feedback that we have worked into propositions that we're working up. Have the next one, please, Callum. So it takes us to moving forwards. We know moving forwards with a new government in there is going to be a lot more of a focus on the join up of the work, health and skills systems. I don't think that's going anywhere. So we need to consider what are the vehicles we can use that works across those three systems that can drive us into the place of healthier outcomes and better work opportunities for our residents. We see there is an alignment to our current skills brokerage service, but what we're looking at is how do we expand that offer? How does it move into that space where our brokers can be doing more with it? How can we push this? How can we take it to the best it can be? Can we bring it into our broader procurement processes? Can it sit procurement process not only at a combined authority level, but a lot around our constituent partners and then further out into the public sector in the area? I think we need to consider future funding and what the return on investment is likely to look like. If ever we're asking for funding, there needs to be a reason as to why we are asking for it. But what I'm keen to get is input from members, from yourselves. What would be important to your areas? What resonates with you around good work? What's a barrier? I'd like to open this up for a little bit of discussion, mindful of time. So if it's something that there is an appetite to discuss further, I'm wondering if it's something that in the next informal skills committee we could maybe do. But I will pause now and hand across.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a really interesting area of work and very important across the whole range of different topics. It does, as you say, cover quite a large scope. Who would like to go first? Samantha.
Hi, I work for Northwest Anglia Foundation Trust, and we have over 7,000 staff working across all sites: Huntingdon, Donington, Peterborough, Stamford, Ely. It also resonates with the NHS People Promise, how they'll look at how do we retain our staff and how do we recruit our staff as well. So something like this, the Good Work programme, I think would really help the trust with, especially with their retention and recruitment. Can I just ask, have you reached out to other councils like Peterborough, Cambridge and that, and what have you done with the private sector? Because I know with Peterborough, we're very much a low wage economy. Thank you.
Okay. Never quite sure. Okay, to come back on that. So yeah, we have reached out to our other constituent partners, and we've taken feedback on board from those constituent partners. In regards to reaching out to employers in the area, we've done that through a number of consultation events, but I think it's something we could do more on, absolutely. It's really, so from my point, it's great to hear that this is something that, you know, at system level resonates with yourselves. I think it's really the greater sum comes from us working in partnership and making sure that we've got, you know, you will be the biggest employer, are the biggest employer nationally, but the biggest employer in the area in terms of volume. So I would certainly be, you know, be really, really privileged to be able to pick up further conversations around the Good Work Charter and how it can work at that systems level.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
Brilliant. That's what I'm going to say. I mean, the fact that obviously you see lots of the combined authorities, you talk about the work that Andy Burnham's done in Greater Manchester, but it was certainly something when we sit down together, this keeps coming up about how it can be transformative. You wanted feedback? Well, I would say I'm obviously my background linked in with Sam working at Northwest Anglia. I'd be very keen to work with all those partners and, you know, in various routes. But I think there's a link to how we can get the best out of our population. What is this secret which is going to make us more productive as a country, as a region? And I am absolutely focused on the thing about getting people who, be they in recent times have been disadvantaged through outcomes of the COVID pandemic or just long-term healthcare conditions around obesity and all these things, but getting people to understand that important link. You know, I'll be interested to hear what the business board has to say, but, you know, this thing about the link between good work, good health, and a productive economy. And you know, I've often said, why did I ever come into this role, or ask myself, and I said, well, the thing is, I realize that you can do a lot more by getting families out of, you know, low income poverty and changing lives with ambition around work, employment opportunities. So the link to health and well-being, if we could be the good work practice that really, really focus on health, I'd love it. I appreciate there's many other aspects. Absolutely. I think we should say it loud and proud. If it could bake it in, it's all about procurement. If you don't follow these practices, we don't want to work with you. Let's just be really clear about it. Why wouldn't you sign up to this? Because you know what? Any employer worth the salt would want to have these sorts of things written large on their doors as they're coming through. You come and work with me, big or small, CIC or massive multinational. If you're signed up to this, then we should want to work with you. And you live by your values, then you get paid by your values. And then finally, I have one criticism. You may have done it, but it's not there. And I thought Sam was going to ask it, both because we're both members of a union. And I can't see in your consultation that you've linked in with the unions. So I think there is definitely a thing there. And I'm sure we can help with making those introductions. But I think it would be remiss of us not to get other representatives in terms of the trade union movement. And that's a very small criticism.
I can take criticism.
Okay.
No, it's helpful. It's helpful. I'm taking it in the spirit in which it's intended.
And it was very much in the spirit. I am delighted to see this here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you, Sam.
Will you be looking at, with this good charter, that employers actually pay the real living wage? Because it's something that I am raising with my trust winning a number of campaigns. So
yeah, so I think the intention is, whilst we're not mandating people have to hit a certain criteria, it's about encouraging working towards, and the national living wage will be a part of that. And I think it's recognizing that some people will be on a journey to that national living wage, and from an employer part, it isn't as easy as saying, you know, we pay minimum wage, we're now going to living wage. You know, there is an adjustment there that needs to happen in terms of their business modelling and whatever to get there. So I think it's around that encouragement too, and supporting, having the resources that support people to be able to move into that space. But yeah, that out of the sort of areas that we outlined up there, that's absolutely key to it.
Eileen.
I was just wondering whether you've engaged with South Cambridgeshire District Council, who are running the trial on a 4-day working week, which actually is 32 hours now. And there's been a lot of evaluation of that. And so I just wondered if you've been engaged with that work.
So I know Claire had engaged with South Cams. I don't know if she'd found anything around or what she'd done around the 4-day working week, but it would certainly be something we would be interested in the findings of. Absolutely.
It was mainly around recruitment and retention, because South Cambridgeshire is a very expensive area to live in. And so there had to be something to provide a motivation for people to work for South Cams rather than other organisations.
Thank you.
Oh. So the Bennett Institute for Public Policy did a load of that work on South Cams, and they're really interesting. So at some point, I'm sure you'd love a conversation.
Thank you.
So in terms of my feedback, and you probably know from our engagements before, I'm absolutely all for it. I think it's brilliant. I get really fed up with other employers that think it doesn't apply to them to offer a really great place for them to work. I think, engagement will be the challenge. I'm not going to say anything that you don't already know. But I think from my mind, it's how to kind of build in some value add. And I love that you're talking about making it almost like a receptacle of like resources for SMEs to help them access that ability to do a bit better, or to understand how they can do better. And whether it could, almost be a bit like, I kind of winced a little bit. My inner cynic, on the other hand, kind of winced a bit when you said about investors in people. I think, the feedback that came back from the employer kind of sessions and the feedback that you've had on your slides was around kind of how to make it not just a badge that goes on, company-headed paper, and no one ever thinks about the quality of it. And I think my other bigger, cynic is, I've worked for big employers and they'll pass this or whatever, come out well, but actually underneath that is actually how they behave on a day-to-day basis with their employees. So whether there's some way of almost weaving through some sort of, great place to work, best employers style feedback loop to validate it, but also, give that benchmarking. But love it. Yeah.
I like that idea. And I also think actually dependent on the size of the organisation would depend on the sort of need for support and provision. So I think there is, a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. So at Huntingdon District Council, we're talking a lot about the connection between good quality work and people's health and their well-being. So it's really exciting to see this as a live topic here as well. And I'm sure that we'll want to continue those discussions. So absolutely working in partnership and talking about procurement. I think that's a conversation we're really keen to have. You mentioned about it being more than a press release. And I think that is always the challenge of these kind of documents, and how do you turn it into a practical action for, that exists at scale. The reflection I had when I've worked for, or not just me actually, but members of family, close family and friends, when they've worked for small organizations that don't have an HR manager, there are a couple of people or 5 people and they're looking to grow. And often they learn by their own mistakes. And a wise person said, you learn by other people's mistakes. But actually, I think there's a huge inherent value in having this kind of resource toolkit, whether it's, someone at the end of a phone call or whatever it might be. Because employers, they want to be good employers. There's few employers that aim, to take advantage of the people that are working for them. And so I think that'll be really warmly received. I don't think we have to sort of crowbar them into joining this thing. I think it's something that will be, absolutely embraced. But it's great to see it coming from the CPCA. So thanks for the work. It's really exciting.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is a question, maybe not so much for yourself, Laura, but it might be for Richard. But it's just in the paper at 5.1 about financial implications. It says budget has been identified up to £1 and then XXXX. So it kind of goes back to your point that you made, where this really works. Obviously, you have to be willing to commit. Obviously, there's no figure in there, and I don't know if it's deliberate.
All
right, thank you.
So there is a budget, and it did go in, and I don't think Track Changes has taken it. So we have some budget within an overall budget line we've got around the implementation of the joint work and health strategy. We are in the process of defining how much of that sits where and goes where. So there is budget. It's a proportion of an overarching £500,000 budget. So that isn't for all of this. There is, much greater work that needs to go. And I think, Mayor, it goes to the earlier point around where can we take this? What investment can we get? What's the return on investment going to look like for us to be able to do this at scale? Because I think what we've got in the budget at the moment is probably enough for us to get something off the ground. We can anchor it to our skills brokerage service, but to take this further, we need to consider what the infrastructure and resource is going to look like.
I'm delighted to hear that, and it may be that I downloaded mine from the internet rather than the most
one as well. So I don't quite know how it's because Bruna said to me that, Laura, this is it. So
well, it's okay. The point's been made. There is budget.
There is
Thank
some.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. I'm going to say a couple of things, and then I think probably we can wrap this one up. So yeah, it's great to have this piece of work coming forward. I think it's a really important piece of work. It's good to see what's going on in other places and be able to learn from what they're doing. And I think that the starting by working with the constituent authorities and thinking about our procurement processes is obviously a way to try and make this happen in some areas quite quickly. The thing that I'm particularly aware of as the leader of the county council, 80% of whose budget is spent on care, much of which is with relatively small organisations, is that while Ben is right, nearly all organisations want to be good employers. Actually, there are costs and difficulties attached to that, and being a good employer is not something that actually is super easy when you're a very small organisation, and particularly when you have a workforce for whom the skills pathways are not that obvious. Yeah. So actually supporting people onto the next stages of their career is not obvious in some areas, and care is definitely one of those. So while there are some kind of fairly obvious first steps, and it's comparatively easy to work with the procurement through our districts and councils, and with the NHS and with the unions and all of those sorts of things, and all of that should definitely happen. I think in some ways, the biggest impact from this piece of work will be if we can put structures in place that support some of those smaller and smaller employers and smaller companies to be able to provide the same kind of career progression that you would get in a large company, when it's much more difficult for them to be able to do that. Now, that's going to take a bit of time, but if we can get that right, that would be fantastic.
Excellent. And I think, just to sort of come back on that very quickly, I think having a number of different categories, you cannot expect everybody to be doing everything, all at once. Your large corporates might be, but actually your SMEs, they may be able to focus in more on certain categories and elements of that, which is, it's part of that continuous improvement. As long as we are pushing people to be better employers, we all benefit from it.
Thank you. So I think this is for noting, and I think we have definitely noted it. And I think there's a lot of support for it. So thank you very much for presenting it, Laura. I'm afraid that the next one is yours as well. Yes. So we will get straight on to the Universal Support Programme. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Do have a few slides that Callum's going to share in one moment. Okay, so purpose of this is purely a verbal update. You've probably noticed it's gone on the forward plan for quite a few meetings and has been pushed. So we thought it would be probably sensible just to give a bit of an update on the Universal Support Programme, where we're at, and then to gather some feedback from people at the end. Have the next slide, please. Alan, thank you. So, bit of a recap then. Informal Skills Committee in May, we did an update on universal support and what we believed would be happening. It was introduced in the 2023 budget as part of a 3.5 billion package of measures to address economic inactivity. And this was really around the universal support element was about large scale supported employment programs. So looking at those that are furthest from the labour market, that are out of work due to a long-term health condition. So the programme was due to run alongside some other provision that was due to exit the market. And we paused when the election, the general election was announced. And then we had a change of government. And we are currently awaiting further information around the Universal Support Programme. So change of government then, we know this type of work is going to continue to be a priority. Liz Kendall's speech last week was around fundamental reform, and there's a quote I've got here, which was around spiralling economic activity is our biggest challenge. 80% of employment rates, 80% of our employment rate is based upon that. And there is a white paper that's going to be produced around getting Britain working again, which is going to be called Pathways to Work. And that also within this speech, it was around empowering local leaders and local areas to tackle economic inactivity. So the basis and the premise of the Universal Support Programme, we believe, is still going to exist. Whether it's going to be called Universal Support, we don't know. We are awaiting information from government around this. So supporting that demographic is absolutely still going to be a priority for us. And when we can officially update, we will do. But today, I thought it would be helpful just to run through where we're currently at with our thinking. Have the next slide, please. So we've had a look at economic inactivity across all of our districts. And actually, I think you'll see from those pie charts where we have those that are economically inactive. In all but Cambridge, the predominance sits around the retired population. Cambridge is students, and I don't think there's any great surprise to anybody in that. But what we do notice is it's pretty consistent around the long-term sick and disabled across all of our areas in terms of sitting at around 6%. With the exception of Fenland and Peterborough, where we're almost double that, 11 and 12% respectively. And we also have sort of our highest population sat within Peterborough. So I think as a very sort of quick calculation on that, we've got quite a lot of work to do that's probably going to target the north of the patch in terms of where we would want this provision to be focusing. I won't go through all of this. What I'm trying to illustrate on this is as we look at work and health, and I haven't overlaid skills onto this, it's a really complicated landscape. There's a lot of work that's going on, and we've got a huge amount to do at that system level. You can see on the left of the screen here, we've got work, on the right, we've got health. And right at the very bottom, you can see universal support in the yellow block and Workwell in turquoise. They're probably where our focus needs to be in terms of what we are going to be doing, universal support in whatever its guise is. We have Workwell in the area. Workwell is led by the Integrated Care Board, and they're in an implementation phase at the moment. So we've got two sides of a coin here. We've got one that's looking very much at the long-term unemployed, and one that's looking at those that are closer to the labour market. So we're looking at those with fit notes. We're looking at those that perhaps need some kind of triage support that's going to support them in either returning to work or stop them going out of work. But this is the space in which we're operating. The next slide I've got just sits around what provision is already available. I won't go into this. You will get a copy of the slides, but we know in the region we've got probably 4 key large-scale employment programs that operate. We've also then got pockets of work that happens in the area as well, and that might be through funding such as the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It might be through some local authority granted funding, and there is a huge amount of work that goes on through the charity and voluntary sector as well. So There is a lot. It is very, very busy, but we're looking at how we bring these systems together. And it goes to that good workplace, doesn't it? It takes this, it all loops back into good work. Have the next one, please, Callum. So what does this mean for us? Well, at a combined authority level, if it is universal support, and if that's not what the programme's called, we are expecting to be the accountable body. This is new for the Department of Work and Pensions to work on this level with MCAs and local authorities. We're awaiting further information. We are really sat in almost a holding pen at the moment. We are waiting to see what's going to come out and waiting to see which way we need to respond and react to that. And then in terms of next steps, what we really need to be doing is looking at what the local authorities need to consider and what the approach needs to be for their areas. Whilst we'll be looking at a programme very much at the overall combined authority area, very aware that there is going to be different needs and certainly different target groups that are going to be sat within those local authority areas. And we want to make sure that this place-based approach is right at that district level. We need to build on our stakeholder engagement. It's a really tricky thing to do, isn't it, when you don't know what you're building on, because we know we have a concept, but we can't operationalize that yet. But there needs to be that continued stakeholder engagement. And then it really is that co-production piece. So it's having each of the areas and each of the stakeholders supporting a co-produced piece to inform a delivery plan that is going to meet the needs of our area. So from a combined authority management and governance piece, this will go through, if it is as we expect it to be, we'll go through our single assurance framework. Probably one of the first pieces for the combined authority, certainly one of the first pieces for ourselves as an employment and skills team. As I said, we will be the accountable body. And resource will be required. We need to consider what this means to us longer term and future proofing. So whilst, we could scale up for one programme, actually longer term, what does it look like in this work and health space? We don't know what the key performance indicators are going to be. They're to be determined, but we know we'll be operating within some level of KPIs. And what we're expecting is there to be a national spine, but very much with that localized approach. So we're expecting there to be key elements of delivery that are a mandated, you need to, and then it will be for us to design the how, the who, and the where. Can I have the next slide, please, Callum? And then I think from a consideration point, we need to think about the existing provision. You saw the slide at the beginning that showed how convoluted and complex the landscape is. What does our provision look like? More importantly, what does our exiting provision look like? We know there are end dates looming for the Restart programme and for the Pioneer programme. Single or multiple providers, what would work for us as a region? Are we looking at encouraging a procured activity that might take us to a single provider with a big supply chain? Are we looking at multiples in the area? How do we want this to work? What is right for us in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough? We need to consider local engagement and the insights that's going to give us. What do we know? What don't we know? And I think it's the what don't we know that's more important. What do we need to go and find out? What can we learn from other areas? And most importantly, there's those learning from the Restart and the work and health programmes. They've been operating now for a number of years, and there will be a huge amount of intelligence that comes out of that needs to be informing what we do moving forward. Up next. I will be quiet and we'll go over for comments and questions to everybody here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I think it's quite an exciting new area for us to be thinking about. Sam.
With the data, you were the first slide showing the economically inactive. Are you able to break it down to see how many women and men are actually socially, economically inactive? Because we know that women tend to predominantly stay at home, look after the children, and then trying to find a way back into work 20 years later, but don't have the skills to do that. That would be quite interesting to know what that data is. Thank you.
No, I will see what I can find on that, and agreed.
in the absence of other comments, I'm just going to say I do think this is a potentially huge new area for us to be working in. I'm aware from some sort of outside of this meeting conversations that actually relationships between our skills team and the DWP lead in this area are good, and I think better than in some places, which is really helpful.
Agreed.
But it is a really potentially quite large space that government are looking to combined authorities to start taking some responsibility for. And I think it's important for this committee to be aware of just what a kind of game-changing opportunity this might be, but also a big responsibility because it's a huge area of work. So we will look forward to getting more updates on this in the autumn. Some more updates may appear sooner than the autumn. And if there is information on it, if you're willing to kind of keep briefing us over the summer, that would be really helpful, because I think it's something that we're all really interested in. But it is definitely moving comparatively fast, as a number of things in Whitehall seem to be at the moment. It's quite a surprise. Good. Ben, and then probably we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Yeah, just to say, we're slightly stunned into silence at, quite a lot of new information, but it sounds really exciting, and I don't want the lack of comments to indicate anything other than we're really enthusiastic about this work, and hope to hear more. Thank you.
On from that, I think they're probably, assuming that some of the announcements that come forward are the way I'm sort of expecting them, they are going to be. I think there's going to be a certain amount of need to upskill members of this committee in terms of understanding about programs getting into work, because it's not something that there's a lot of this work that we've been doing kind of with people joining us and learning about over many years. And actually this is quite a big new area of work that we will probably need some training on. Having said which, we now come to the Skills and Employment Committee agenda plan. So I don't know whether anyone's got, wondering whether there was something I was supposed to be adding at this point, and I can't remember what it was. Might have been another committee, so let's assume not. Any other comments on the agenda plan? Do you want to go into it?
No, there was a mention about the directors. I know.
Yes. That is what it was. Okay, that's great. So other committees of the combined authority have an item called Directors Highlight Report, including the board and I think the TIC committee, which sort of allows for bringing things onto the agenda that without them necessarily having to have a whole item of their own or a decision. And I think given that things are moving quite quickly, it would probably be quite helpful for us to put that on our future agendas. Is the committee happy if we put that on the agenda and see how it goes? Good. I'm getting nods around the room. So we will add that to the agenda plan. Thank you very much, Joanna. And I think with that, we can all finish for the day and have a great summer, everyone. And we'll see you on the 9th of September, which will come around terrifyingly soon. Thank you all very much.